The wilderness holds many secrets beneath its canopy of trees and across its vast expanses of untamed land. While millions of people safely enjoy camping and hiking each year, there are those unfortunate few who venture into nature never to return. These disappearances leave behind grieving families, baffled investigators, and stories that continue to haunt the outdoor community. Here are 5 compelling cases of campers who vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and the desperate hope that someday answers might emerge from the silence of the wild. On February 24th, 1978, 5 men from Yuba County, California, disappeared after attending a basketball game in Chico. Gary Mathias, Jack Madruga, Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, and Ted Wire were all intellectually disabled men in their 20s and 30s who lived relatively structured lives. They were passionate basketball fans and had been looking forward to watching their favorite team play before attending their own game the following day. The group left Chico in Madruga's Mercury Montego after the game ended around 10 p.m. They were expected to drive straight home along a familiar route they had traveled many times before. Instead, their car was found 4 days later, 70 miles away in the opposite direction, abandoned on a mountain road in the Plumas National Forest. The vehicle was stuck in snow, but appeared to have been driven there deliberately rather than sliding off the road accidentally. What made this discovery so puzzling was the car's location. The men had somehow ended up on a remote Forest Service road that would have required them to make several deliberate turns away from their known route home. The car was found with its windows rolled down despite the freezing temperatures, and there was no sign of the 5 men anywhere in the immediate area. Months later, a Forest Service worker discovered the body of Ted Wire in a remote trailer used by Forest Service workers, 19 miles from where the car was abandoned. Wire had somehow survived for weeks in the wilderness, as evidenced by his significant weight loss and the fact that he had been consuming military rations stored in the trailer. Despite the abundance of food and a propane tank that could have provided heat, Wire had apparently frozen to death. Most mysteriously, his feet were badly frostbitten, and he had lost both his shoes. Yet there was no indication of how he had traveled those 19 miles through treacherous mountain terrain. The bodies of Sterling, Hewitt, and Madruga were eventually found in the same general area, but Gary Mathias was never located. His disappearance remains one of California's most enduring mysteries. Investigators found no evidence of foul play, no explanation for why the men had driven into the mountains, and no clear understanding of what had happened during their final weeks in the wilderness. The case has spawned numerous theories ranging from the mundane to the bizarre, but none have provided satisfactory answers to explain how 5 men, who were creatures of habit, could have made such a fatal deviation from their normal routine. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park has seen its share of disappearances, but few cases have garnered as much attention or generated as many theories as that of 6-year-old Dennis Martin. On June 14, 1969, the Martin family from Knoxville was enjoying a Father's Day camping trip in the Smokies. Dennis was playing a hide-and-seek game with his brother and 2 other boys near their campsite at Spence Field when he simply vanished. The children had planned to jump out and scare their parents and grandfather, who were sitting around the campsite. Dennis ran ahead to hide behind some trees and bushes, but when the other boys reached the hiding spot, he was nowhere to be found. Within minutes of realizing Dennis was missing, his father began searching and calling for him. When Dennis failed to respond, the family contacted park rangers, triggering one of the largest search operations in national park history. The search for Dennis Martin lasted 10 days and involved over 1,400 people, including park rangers, FBI agents, military personnel, and volunteers. Helicopters, bloodhounds, and even psychics were brought in to help locate the missing boy. Despite the massive effort covering over 56 square miles of rugged mountain terrain, searchers found only a few potential clues: a possible footprint and what might have been torn fabric from Dennis's shirt. What made Dennis's disappearance particularly mystifying was the speed with which he had vanished and the lack of any conclusive evidence despite the immediate response. The area where he disappeared was not particularly remote, and the search began within an hour of his disappearance. Weather conditions were good, and Dennis was described as a bright child who would likely have responded to the calls of searchers. Over the years, Numerous theories have emerged to explain Dennis's fate. Some believe he simply became lost and succumbed to the elements in an area that searchers somehow missed. Others point to reports of a man in the area acting strangely around children, suggesting possible abduction. More controversial theories involve wildlife attacks, or even more exotic explanations. Despite periodic searches and investigations over the decades, no trace of Dennis Martin has ever been definitively found, making his case one of the most haunting unsolved disappearances in national park history. The crazy mountains of Montana earned their name from Native American beliefs about the strange occurrences in the region, and the disappearance of Keith Reinhard in 1988 has only added to the area's mysterious reputation. Reinhard, a 54-year-old silver prospector and experienced outdoorsman from Iowa, had been camping and prospecting in the crazy mountains for several years before his final trip in September 1988. Reinhard was known for his meticulous planning and self-sufficiency in the wilderness. He had established several camps throughout the crazy mountains and was familiar with the terrain. His disappearance was discovered when he failed to return from what was supposed to be a routine prospecting trip. When searchers located his camp, they found a scene that defied explanation. The camp appeared to have been abandoned suddenly and inexplicably. Reinhard's tent was still standing with most of his belongings inside, including valuable equipment and supplies he would never have left behind voluntarily. His truck was parked nearby with the keys still in the ignition. Most puzzling of all, searchers found his glasses neatly placed on a log, as if he had carefully set them down before walking away. For a man who was nearly blind without his glasses, this detail was particularly disturbing. Search teams combed the area extensively, but found no footprints, no trail, and no evidence of where Reinhard might have gone after leaving his camp. The lack of any trail was especially mystifying given the terrain and weather conditions. There were no signs of animal attack, no evidence of foul play, and no indication that Reinhard had packed any supplies for travel. Local law enforcement and volunteers searched for months, covering hundreds of square miles of wilderness. They found no trace of Reinhard or any clues about his fate. The case attracted national attention when it was featured on the television show Unsolved Mysteries, but even the increased exposure failed to generate any solid leads. What made Reinhard's disappearance even more unusual were reports from other campers and prospectors in the area around the same time. Several people reported strange occurrences, unusual sounds, and unexplained phenomena in the crazy mountains during that period. Whether these reports were related to Reinhard's disappearance or simply reflected the area's already mysterious reputation remains unclear. Yosemite National Park's stunning beauty attracts millions of visitors annually, but it was also the setting for one of California's most perplexing disappearances. On July 17, 1981, 14-year-old Stacy Ann Aris vanished while on a horseback riding trip with her father and a group from Sunrise High Sierra Camp. Stacy was an experienced rider and familiar with wilderness activities. The group had spent the morning riding through the scenic backcountry near the Merced River, taking photographs and enjoying the spectacular mountain scenery. During a rest stop, Stacy decided to walk a short distance away from the group to take some photographs of the landscape. Her father watched her walk away toward a small ridge, but when he looked for her again, just minutes later, she was gone. The initial search began immediately, with other members of the riding party spreading out to look for Stacy. When she couldn't be quickly located, park rangers were notified, and a formal search operation was launched. Over the following days, the search grew to include hundreds of people, including park rangers, law enforcement officers, search and rescue teams, and volunteers from the local community. Despite the massive search effort, investigators found virtually no trace of Stacy. The few potential clues discovered during the search were ultimately inconclusive. Searchers found what appeared to be a lens from a camera in the area where she was last seen, but it was never definitively linked to Stacy's equipment. No footprints, clothing, or other personal items were ever located. What made Stacy's disappearance particularly puzzling was the short time frame involved and the terrain where she vanished. She had been gone for only a few minutes before her absence was noticed, and the area was not particularly treacherous or remote. The landscape was relatively open, making it difficult to understand how she could have disappeared so completely and quickly. Investigators considered various possibilities, including accidental fall, animal attack, getting lost, and even abduction. However, none of these theories adequately explained the complete absence of evidence. The area was thoroughly searched multiple times, including with the assistance of tracking dogs and aircraft, but no definitive trace of Stacy was ever found. Over the years, Stacy's case has been periodically reopened and re-examined as new search techniques and technologies have become available. However, despite these efforts and the continued hope of her family, her disappearance remains unsolved. The case stands as a reminder of how quickly and completely someone can vanish in the wilderness, even under circumstances that seem relatively safe and controlled. The Wind River Mountains of Wyoming provided the backdrop for another mysterious disappearance that continues to baffle investigators more than 2 decades later. Amy Roe Bechtel, a 24-year-old competitive runner and photographer, vanished on July 24, 1997, while on what should have been a routine outdoor excursion near Lander, Wyoming. Amy was an accomplished athlete and experienced outdoorswoman who had moved to Wyoming with her husband Steve to enjoy the outdoor lifestyle the state offered. On the day she disappeared, Amy had planned to go jogging in the Shoshone National Forest area and possibly scout locations for a future photography assignment. She left her home in the afternoon, telling her husband she would be back by evening. When Amy failed to return home that night, Steve contacted authorities and a search was initiated. Amy's white Toyota Tercel was found the next day, parked at a trailhead in the Burnt Gulch area, about 40 miles from Lander. The car was unlocked with her wallet and running shoes inside, but there was no sign of Amy herself. The discovery of the car raised immediate questions about Amy's intended activities that day. If she had planned to go running, why were her running shoes still in the car? If she was scouting photography locations, where was her camera equipment? The inconsistencies between her stated plans and the evidence at the scene created confusion from the beginning of the investigation. Search teams spent weeks combing the rugged terrain around where Amy's car was found. The area included steep terrain, dense forest, and numerous ravines where someone could easily become lost or injured. Despite extensive searching using ground teams, aircraft, and tracking dogs, no trace of Amy was found beyond her abandoned vehicle. As the investigation progressed, it expanded beyond a simple missing person case. Law enforcement began examining Amy's personal life, relationships, and activities leading up to her disappearance. Some investigators suspected that Amy's disappearance might not have been accidental, pointing to inconsistencies in the timeline and evidence that suggested she might have met with foul play. The case took various turns over the years, with different suspects emerging and being investigated. However, no charges were ever filed, and no definitive evidence was found to support any particular theory about what happened to Amy. Some investigators continued to believe she had simply become lost or injured in the wilderness, while others remained convinced that her disappearance was the result of criminal activity. Amy's case gained national attention through media coverage and advocacy efforts by her family and friends. Despite the publicity and ongoing investigative efforts, her disappearance remains unsolved. The case exemplifies the challenges faced by investigators when someone vanishes in remote wilderness areas where natural hazards and human threats can both play a role. These 5 cases represent just a fraction of the unexplained disappearances that occur in America's wilderness areas each year. What makes them particularly haunting is not just the absence of the missing individuals, but the absence of answers. Despite extensive searches, dedicated investigators, and advances in search and rescue technology, these cases remain unsolved puzzles that continue to generate theories, speculation, and hope for resolution. Each case highlights different aspects of the challenges involved in wilderness disappearances. Some, like Dennis Martin's case, demonstrate how quickly someone can vanish even in areas under close observation. Others, like Keith Reinhardt's disappearance, show how even experienced outdoorsmen can seemingly vanish without leaving any trace of their fate. The Yuba County 5 case illustrates how group dynamics and decision-making can lead to tragic outcomes that defy logical explanation. These disappearances serve as sobering reminders of the inherent risks associated with wilderness activities, while also acknowledging that some mysteries may never be solved. They represent the intersection of human vulnerability and nature's indifference, creating stories that resonate with our deepest fears about the unknown. For the families and friends left behind, these cases represent ongoing grief and the desperate hope that someday, somewhere, answers might emerge from the wilderness that claimed their loved ones. The wilderness will always hold its secrets, and somewhere among the trees, mountains, and vast open spaces, these 5 individuals became part of those secrets. Their stories continue to remind us that despite our modern technology and search capabilities, the natural world can still claim people completely and mysteriously, leaving behind only questions and the haunting silence of the wild.